OG Rose here, and today we're going to be talking about section 10 of belonging again. And we've talked a lot about the difference between tolerance and humility, and how for Conyers, tolerance supported state growth, and how humility maintained small communities' differences of opinion without people feeling like they had to abandon their beliefs, but instead could hold to their beliefs to form their communities, thus making belonging possible, while simultaneously creating opportunity spaces by which people could exchange ideas and test what they believe. Jonathan Rauch, as I've already mentioned, wrote this very important book called Kindly Inquisitors. And the question the book really wants to address is, how do we stop internal conflicts and civil wars and civil unrest and things like that? If there's going to be diverse societies and those differences are just not going to be ironed out into meaninglessness by the state robbing them of their authority, if the way that these groups operate through is humility, then there needs to be a system by which people can feel like they're heard, and a way to manage disagreements between these groups, because there's going to be different groups, and so there's going to be disagreements, meaningful disagreements if it's on terms of humility. So how do we keep that from exploding, from erupting into large conflict? There's certainly going to be people who feel anxiety. There's going to be degrees of unhappiness, degrees of people not being pleased with what's going on, but how do we keep that? That's just always going to be the case. There's going to be some degree of tension because we don't live in a perfect world, but how do we keep that from blowing up into something large and something very problematic, violent, balkanization, and so on? And Jonathan Rauch really believed that liberal science was the key to that. The problem of how to manage conflict of belief is a problem that every society has to solve. And Rauch talks about how in Plato, the Republic, the way the great philosopher dealt with that was just, to iron out, to control the reality industry, to stop the artists, to stop the creation of lots of new ideas, so to create a fence of what kind of ideas would be allowed and wouldn't be allowed. And Plato viewed this as just, because if the philosopher king can identify the best ideas, well, then we just force everyone to believe the best ideas and not let their uneducated minds wander. And this may seem cruel, but it's actually an act of great benevolence, in the same way that a parent not letting their child explore poisonous fruit is benevolent, even though it seems very, very controlling. But for Jonathan Rauch, the dream of the philosopher king is in fact a dream, and this inevitably just leads to totalitarianism. It's a nightmare, because what constitutes the best ideas is so relative to particular circumstance, particular way of life, the particular ideology that someone ascribes to. And then you have, as discussed in the conflict of mind, these essential problems of rationality itself, that when you try to control the reality industry, it just becomes a totalitarian force. So Rauch is not impressed by the Republic in any way whatsoever. But if people are going to have different views, though, then how are they going to be unified? How is there going to be a unity in the multiplicity? How are you going to have a United States, per se, which brings the great debate of, that Lincoln is dealing with. Before the Civil War, it's the United States are, and afterwards it's the United States is. And how do you have a balance where there is a isness within the are-ness, and yet the are-ness does not feel negated? And for Jonathan Rauch, what ends up happening is, in the art of liberal science, there is a very key distinction between beliefs and knowledge. And what schools teach and what the secular society follows is knowledge, not beliefs. But at the same time, liberal science does not claim that people's beliefs are necessarily false. It just draws a clear epistemic difference between belief and knowledge. And the key figure in this is called Popper. All knowledge, before it is tested and falsified into knowledge, is a belief. And if you believe something, say that the world is flat, no one's going to necessarily say that because you believe that you're an idiot. You can't even enter the discussion, at least before it's been tested. But you have to bring your belief to a place that could be tested, where, by the way, you are not the only one who can recognize the truth. It has to be the person acknowledging the belief as who's putting it forth as knowledge. If the belief can in fact be known as knowledge, it must not be dependent to be known as such on the observer. In no person in particular, as Rauch says, no particular person must be necessary to acknowledge the knowledge, to understand the belief as knowledge as opposed to mere belief. So, if you exist in a country of liberal science, you're free to believe that the world is flat. But if you want your belief to be knowledge, if you want it to be something that the society organizes around, that is taught in schools, then it's going to have to be tested. And if it cannot pass the test, then it must stay belief. And it's this key difference, and there's a lot more to it than that. But the same thing, it's very important. So if you want your bigotry or your supposedly bigoted beliefs to be knowledge, well, then they have to be tested. And if not, well, then you just have to keep them private. So there's this very key distinction between private life and public life, of which is not saying that knowledge is necessarily more true than belief. That's really important, because there are very possibly lots of true beliefs. Jonathan Rauch does not, or Karl Popper doesn't want to claim that all truth is falsifiable. But falsification is going to play a key role in helping us organize knowledge from beliefs, ideas that society organizes around from ideas that private lives can organize around. And it's precisely that because people are not forced to disbelieve in their beliefs or give up their beliefs, and that there is still the possibility and the acknowledgement that they may be true, even though they can't be knowledge. There is such thing as true belief, as there is the category of true knowledge. And also note that just because something passes falsification, it may still be false. You could have a premise that moves in the category of knowledge that actually in the end ends up being false. The idea that all swans are white, and then we find out one day that swans can be black, thus black swans. And a black swan can be considered true knowledge that is suddenly unveiled to be false. Because even knowledge is going to be contingent upon circumstance and things like that. So the very fact that liberal science brackets out the category of true and instead draws distinction between belief and knowledge, which are erected upon a distinction between private and public, Jonathan Rauch thinks this plays a very key role in maintaining existential anxiety into society so that it does not boil over. And when it boils over, there can be civil conflict, totalitarianism can become appealing, and a free society can be lost. And so for Jonathan Rauch, one of the main ways that liberal science operates in America, for example, is through free speech, free exchange, free assembly, and stuff like that. And so if those liberties are threatened and lost, then liberal science will be lost, and existential anxiety will grow. People will feel, and if people aren't allowed to voice their beliefs, then there's also going to be a social backlash, possibly. And look, Jonathan Rauch is not saying that we can't ultimately, if someone has their beliefs tested and they fail and they're unveiled to be ridiculous, then they can be mocked. He doesn't think that mockery is inherently bad. In fact, it can play an important role to stop bigotry, racism, discrimination, and things like that. But he does want to make clear that all beliefs should have a right to be tested. There should not be beliefs that because we just say, oh, well, that's ridiculous, we never give them a fair shake. Now, after we give them a fair shake, a fair chance to become knowledge, assuming that those who purport the belief want the belief to be acknowledged by everyone else as knowledge, or they're demanding certain rights or privileges from the state, well, then if they fail the test, then they can be mocked afterwards, especially if they continue to demand public acknowledgement as opposed to simply a space for private individuals to privately exercise. And Jonathan Rauch also really wants us to stress that, yes, we might be, in a way, privileging knowledge over belief, but it's passed a test. There's grounding for it. It's not arbitrary that liberal science is special in this way. And please note that liberal science is not just merely science. Although falsification and science have a close relationship. It can be used on religious beliefs, theological beliefs, intersectionality, any of those different things. What would be concerning to Rauch, and I think is concerning to Rauch, is if we increasingly start going, well, it's not fair to create a hierarchy between beliefs and knowledge, and to privilege knowledge over belief because they could be equally true. Yes, they may be equally true. A given belief could be equally true as knowledge, but we have to have some sorting mechanism. And if not, it's going to be chaos. If not, that will probably give rise to certain existential anxieties that will have unintentional consequences. And you're also just going to have to create social policy that's going to have to make room for everyone, which is practically impossible. We can't teach every possible belief in school as potential knowledge. We have to have a sorting mechanism. If not, it's going to be a problem. That isn't to say that people can't create their own private schools and go to their private schools and teach whatever beliefs they want as knowledge. But the moment you start saying everyone in the society has to learn X, then X is going to need to be more than a potentially true belief that might be knowledge. Well, that might be true. It's going to have to be knowledge that might be true. And without this categorization, it's going to be a problem. And if we start attacking liberal science, then we're going to lose a very useful mechanism, a necessary mechanism for humility. Well, for humility to be possible, to be exercisable, and for difference to ultimately not become chaotic. So liberal science plays a really important role in this. And if we get rid of it, it is doubtful that the consequences will be good. And furthermore, if there's equal footing for all beliefs, then people are they're gonna take it into their own hands to shut down what they believe is bigotry or racism or stupid or what have you, because there is no test to do it for them. It's going to go into people's own hands to stop the beliefs that they think are dangerous, and then it's everyone vigilantes. Everyone is creating justice in their own lives, and that can lead to chaos. So anyway, that's section 10. I really suggest reading the work of Jonathan Rauch. I like him a lot, and thank you for your time. You can find more on ogrose.com.